Hey, everybody. I was given an advance copy of a new graphic novel from Dark Horse Comics that's coming out next Wednesday. That would be the 24th of July, just in time for Comic-Con. It is a somewhat terrifying horror story called Skinner. And I don't know. I'm going to open with this kind of question. I'm here with one of the writers, Micky Neilson. Micky, my first reaction is this would have made an excellent horror movie. So why go for a graphic novel, and why was Dark Horse the company to do it?
Well, you take what you can get. For one thing, I absolutely agree. I want to see this movie. I think it's fantastic. And honestly, a lot of the pitches that I have with my writing partner Samwise, those are screenplay pitches, and that's kind of
Oh,
what the
okay.
intent is. We'll do these one-page pitches, and they're meant to be, okay, this could be anything. This could be a graphic novel, this could be a movie, this could be a book, it could be whatever we want it to be. And so when we approached Chris, and I can get into later kind of what the original idea was, because it kind of morphed over time for Skinner. But when we first approached him, we were talking about two different kind of avenues that you can go down. And one of those avenues is the publishing avenue. And then the other one is the entertainment avenue, because Dark Horse, they have a first look deal with Netflix and those kinds of things. So it's always a possibility that if it does well, maybe not only will it be the graphic novel, but maybe there is, certainly the possibility that it could be a movie as well.
And they seem to be pivoting to this because I've had a couple of friends release full-on graphic novels rather than monthly series. And this does not read like it was ever intended to be a monthly series.
No. Right. Yeah, it was. Yeah, from the get-go, the pitch was graphic novel.
Okay. And yes, your writing partner is Samwise Didier?
Didier. Yeah.
Didier.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That I've been told many people know. I have to admit, I never played Warcraft, so I don't know.
Sure.
But there, people, if you want to run to the Wikipedia entry, people know who that is. And people know who you are, for you've been working together for a very long time. So what inspired you for this particular story?
So this started off, and hopefully I'm remembering all of this correctly, because my memory is terrible, but I believe the original pitch was called Pale Horse. And the idea, because both Sam and I, we love horror. We love the horror genre, and a ton of the different subgenres. And one of the things we were tossing around was this idea of a story about a punk rock band that is going, like, they're driving through New Mexico or Arizona, and they're going to do a show at some seedy bar, and they get stuck out there. And, there's this Native American legend that exists about Pale Horse and this, kind of vengeful spirit that comes around and is kind of, reincarnated there and goes after them. And it had the like shape-shifting abilities and things that we thought were really cool. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that was one of the pitches that we sent to Dark Horse. We sent them a ton of different ideas. And I think that was one that Chris Tung, VP at Dark Horse, really looked at and said, well, love the horror genre. Horror, typically does well. It's kind of evergreen, as far as publishing is concerned, and building, new IPs and things like that. And so, we started looking at it and developing it and thinking, what else could we do with it? Is there a different direction we could take it? Maybe make it more topical, things like that. And I think that's when we started looking at, okay, well, what if it's, instead of a punk rock band, what if it's a camera crew? And then I think that kind of led into, we started thinking about characters like a Bear Grylls type of person, somebody who goes out into the wilderness and helps people survive out there, and they get it all on camera. And then I think that kind of led into the whole influencer idea, and taking all the influencers and putting them out in the middle of nowhere where they probably would not fare so well.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question is, influencer culture is something very different in
Yeah,
I couldn't have predicted a couple of decades ago this was going to become a thing. I mean, how could we have? But
yeah,
it was interesting. Yes, I mean, I'll pause for a second to say this is almost like a body horror. When you said shapeshifter,
yeah,
it
yeah,
is and it isn't. I mean, I'm trying to be vague because I don't want to ruin it for
sure.
anybody,
Yeah,
but it's also, there's a body count. There were pages where I was just like, oh, that's gross. I can't wait. What's next? What's going to happen next?
yeah,
Really, really well paced. So yeah, and you mentioned you started with a Native American thing, and I've been kind of another interview I've done for this week for pre Comic Con was about legends and myths, and is this one as they called it, Skinner, was it, or because there's one that does crypto. One of the influencers does a podcast about crypto
right.
zoology, and he calls it something I'd never heard before. So that's all I can. Again, I'm trying to really be vague, but did it exist? I mean, were you studying legends, or did you decide we can just plug one in? This is the far north, the First Nations up north of Canada,
Right.
and so I'm woefully underinformed as to their legends.
We did look at that, and the idea was really to look at existing mythology and legends, and especially for those that kind of that region, and say, can we create our own thing and say this influenced those existing legends? And that's basically what we ended up
Oh, okay.
doing, because we had an idea, and that idea changed over time, and like you said, without giving anything away, what the threat ends up being, kind of changed, and as it changed, we thought, well, let's not nail ourselves down to one specific thing, but let's just try to be as creative as we can, and be imaginative about it, and come up with something that hopefully people haven't seen. Not something that you look at and you go, oh, that's a such and such, or I've seen this.
Yeah.
Um, and just real quick, I think when you're creating, especially now, if you're creating a horror story for whatever it is, if it's a comic book, if it's a movie, whatever, um, horror, the genre has become so saturated that I think anybody who's looking at creating anything in this space should think about, how am I going to make this different and unique and memorable? Because anybody who loves horror, I don't have to tell them that you can go, onto any streamer, and you've got hundreds and hundreds of titles to choose from.
Too many. I spend an hour every Friday night trying to decide which one.
Yeah, yeah,
Because it's just too much. But no, you're right. I mean, because I could definitely, and I don't think this is a bad thing. I always say to people, it's like the culture doesn't care. There are people that will not have encountered some of the influences. Like I could spot a few, like, well, it's kind of like this, but it's not really. And it's kind of
yeah,
like, no, stop trying to second guess it, and that's, yeah, it is hard to come up with an original and a unique
it is.
threat in
It is.
horror. But, as you mentioned, this is the second best selling genre in comics right now. Like, no, it's just like horror films. It's hard to go broke
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
horror, and there's some amazing creators, but I got to call out your artist because Peter Kowalski,
Mhm.
his take on this, well, I mean, it's the titular character. Skinner is the name of the legend.
Yeah,
Uh, it's so inventive and it's
yeah.
so disturbing, and you know, and as it goes further, so what kind of back and forth with this? Because if you started this as screenplay, you're thinking visually, but now you have one artist really interpreting this.
Yeah.
What's your back and forth with that?
Yeah, we looked at, so Dark Horse sent us some links to some different artists and said, what do you guys like? How would you like this to be, visually represented, and what kind of a style do you have in mind? And they asked us too if we had artists that we would recommend. And so there was a little bit of back and forth there. And then I think I might be wrong. I believe his name is Piotr.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. We looked at his art, and his was definitely, among all the different artists that we looked at, his really stood out. And then what Samwise did, because originally part of the discussions with Samwise, because he created, the whole look of Warcraft and had his fingerprints on so many different Blizzard properties and everything else, and coming up with the aesthetic for these. So part of the discussion was, could Sam maybe, do the art? And Sam, I don't want to speak for him, but as I remember it, he didn't feel as comfortable doing sequential art. He hadn't had as much experience with sequential art. So his thing, he did the cover for the book, which I think is fantastic. But he said, I think we should get somebody else to do the interiors. And so, but what he did do is he did a lot of concept work. And if you pick up the, the hardcover, you can go to the back and you can see the concept art.
Yeah. I mean, the PDF I got had that in the back. And,
yeah.
I mean, this is probably the best compliment I can give you is I've read this. I really loved it. But I'm definitely going to buy that hardcover at Comic-Con because it just needs to be on my shelf. Awesome. I don't know if I'll be able to swing by your signing, but Comic-Con is crazy. But at the very least, it's the kind of book that to my friends, if they say, I love horror, you got to read this. You got to read this. And Piotr's artwork is such a terrific sense of place. Cityscapes are easy. The sense of isolation up there, that's hard. And I'm not studying any artists who just went, no, cityscapes are hard too. I just mean, it's just, I really believed that, and so I always ask horror writers, what, not necessarily the films that influenced Skinner, but, what are your favorite, maybe one or two horror films that you think influenced you and the way you think and the way you write?
Yeah, for sure. I'm a big horror nerd. My favorite movie, period, is Jacob's Ladder, the original.
I forgot there was a remake. I know,
Yeah, unfortunately, and we could talk about remakes and reboots and all of that. But there are some movies that don't need to be remade, in my opinion. And I think you're setting yourself up for failure a lot of the time when you're doing that. But setting all that aside, Jacob's Ladder is my number one favorite film. And then my favorite subgenre is actually werewolves. I'm a big werewolf nut. And when The Howling came out and American Werewolf in London, those two were kind of competing. And for a while there, werewolf, that subgenre was super hot, and people land in different camps on those two. And I actually had the opportunity to write the Howling miniseries comic book, which was a ton of fun. And I was very fortunate to be able to do that. That is my second favorite. And then number three for me is actually another subgenre that I love to death and is very, very close to the werewolf subgenre, which is the slasher subgenre. And Black Christmas, again, the original. And if you look at that movie, and especially if you watch it multiple times, and if you really dig into the behind the scenes featurettes and things like that, you can really get a sense of how brilliant that movie was for its time. And
I always say that was the precursor of Halloween. I mean, not any shade on John Carpenter, because of course he was brilliant in his own way, but Black Christmas really launched that.
It did.
But it's kind of forgotten because Halloween was bigger. But
Yeah.
and I also think a filmmaker was amazingly versatile. You know,
Yeah.
you get Bob Clark doing that, and for anybody who is not familiar with it, the same guy who made A Christmas Story, and how he could do both. Well, you know, it's like, but that's terrific. So once again, Skinner will be available in comic shops Wednesday, July 24th. And of course, then Mickey, you will be at Comic-Con
Right.
signing, you said Thursday.
Yeah.
And people, you got to pick this up. I mean, we've done I think, a fair job of not really giving anything away, but maybe not.
Okay.
Just know it would make a terrific horror film. I have no,
Yes.
no
Yes.
doubts. I could picture that. Also, an incredible action figure. I do think that first appearance that Piotr does,
Oh, yeah.
that's somebody's shelf needs that. Not me.
That's
That would scare the hell out of me every night. But yeah.
I want to see the sideshow figure, and that's the other thing that I would say is, when you're thinking of whoever your big bad, whoever your villain is going to be, if you're creating a horror story, you really need to think about the character design, and you really need to
Mhm.
put a lot of thought and time into the character design and make it something memorable and something that will hopefully be iconic and live on, beyond the book itself.
I think you could very well have that with this. So
I hope so.
again,
Yeah.
pick it up, people. See you at Comic-Con. Thank you so much, Mickey, for joining me. And I hope to see you next week. All right.
Awesome. Sounds.
Thanks for watching. Please hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss out on any Fanboy Planet video content. And visit fanboyplanet.com for other features, reviews, interviews, previews, and of course, listening to the Fanboy Planet podcast. And remember, use your powers for good.